Hello, good afternoon. I think it's afternoon, right? Great to have you all today. I'm Ashley Hayek. I'm the Executive Vice President of America First Policy Institute, and we're so grateful that you could join us this afternoon. We have two incredible guests that are going to be joining me on stage to talk about policy, which is what we do at AFPI. We'll be talking about world policy, foreign policy, and maybe we can ask Matt Whitaker about some Iowa football, since it sounds like he was with the team before. So how about that? Well, without any further delay, let's go ahead and introduce Ambassador Matt Whitaker and Congressman Zach Nunn. I know, I believe it. Well, I just want to jump right into it so we stay on time here. And let me first read your introductions before we begin. Ambassador Matt Whitaker has served as the U.S. Permanent Representative to NATO since April 2025. He previously served as Acting Attorney General from 2018 to 2019 after serving as Chief of Staff to Attorney General Jeff Sessions. In between, he was a managing partner of Whitaker. I'm not going to say the name. Thank you. Des Moines law firm, and a University of Iowa graduate with degree in business law and political science, 3-year letterman on the football team, helping win a Big Ten championship. The important stuff, right?
That's right.
That's the important
stuff.
Go
Hawks right there.
By the way, I'll just say I'm Iowan by marriage, but I brought my little one who's, I guess, half Iowan blood, right? That's great. A Big Ten Medal of Honor for academic and athletic achievement. So thank you for joining us. Made a long trek from across the pond.
And seems like my regular commute now, unfortunately.
Awesome. And then Congressman Zach Nunn is in his second term, representing Iowa's 3rd Congressional District, a 6th-generation Iowan raised on Des Moines East Side. He nearly served 2 decades in the United States Air Force.
East Side or night?
Thank you for...
Second date with my wife was East Sider night. She kept me around, so it's worth going tomorrow night, guys.
2 decades in the U.S. Air Force as an airborne intelligence officer. Thank you for your service. Deploying 3 times to the Middle East after 9/11 and flying over 700 combat hours. He currently serves as a colonel in the Air Force Reserve. Zach went on to serve in the Iowa House and Senate, helping pass the state's largest tax cuts 3 times over. Love that. In Congress, he continues to fight for common sense policies for the people of Iowa's 21 counties, and he lives in Ankeny with his wife, Kelly, and their 6 children. You beat me by 1. I only have 5.
There's always time to keep up.
Awesome. I think before we jump into the questions, we do want to do a quick prayer and pledge. Perfect. So if I can introduce Matt Judge from Team AFPI and Tessa Hayek, my 8-year-old, who will give us our prayer and pledge. Please stand.
If you all please bow your heads and join me in prayer. Dear God, we come to you this afternoon to give thanks and lift you up. We thank you for blessing us with the opportunity to live in the greatest nation on earth, one nation under your divine protection and guidance. May we seek you in each breath we take, in every decision we make. May we make your mission our mission. We thank you for your mercy. We thank you for your grace. We thank you for your love, and we pray this all in your mighty name. Amen.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic which stands one nation under God, indivisible, and with liberty and justice for all.
Good job, Tessa.
You know, Matt Judge is an Iowa guy.
That's right. Awesome. All right. Ambassador, you've gone from Iowa to representing America on the world stage. What did Iowa teach you about what makes America exceptional?
I think because Iowa is exceptional. I mean, you know, growing up here, being from here, you know, still calling myself a proud Iowan and carrying a driver's license from Iowa, I think it's the life that you're able to lead. I mean, I really feel like if you grow up in Iowa, if you live in Iowa, if you raise your family in Iowa, you can really do anything. It's I had the best education, the best foundation that I could possibly have, and have just taken advantage of the opportunities, and it's really Iowa exceptionalism is American exceptionalism. But as I travel, I've traveled to almost every single country in NATO. There's 32 countries, including the United States, and what I've seen is nothing that will ever replace the United States, both big and small. Our ability to have a platform where somebody with an idea can grow that idea, get capital, expand, and turn it into something amazing. Anyone that wants to accomplish big things can do it in America. And I also have toured a lot of the defense industry here in the United States, and what I've seen is oftentimes I'll be talking to some folks at one of these really interesting startups that has some technology that's fascinating, and many times they're Europeans that moved to the United States because they couldn't get their idea to take off, or they couldn't find funding, or they had some other limitation on scale. And so the United States is just it's the greatest place ever created, and it's still, I think our founding fathers framed it perfectly to form a more perfect union. We're never going to be perfect. We're never going to reach the end of our exceptionalism because it's asymptotic. Our potential goes up as we go up, and we'll never hit that the maximum potential of the United States of America because it is so dynamic, and our founding fathers were so smart, and we just need to protect that. We need to protect that because as I travel the world, there is no kind of corollary to the American dream. It is unique. It's kind of inculcated into all of us to live the American dream, to be everything you possibly can be as an individual, and to also then, support your community and your family and your church and all the things that we just sort of take for granted. That just it's not replicated anywhere else in the world.
And we look at the past 4 years. We saw a country in decline. We saw America last policy from the previous administration, which is why we named our tour the Great American Comeback Tour, because of the comeback this country and this president is trying to make, also including your work, Congressman. What does the Great American Comeback look like? What does that mean to you?
Well, look, I look out across this room and I see great Iowans. I see people who have made real investment in our community. I see people who have helped lead us both on what it means to have a family here, but also what it means to have good policy where a family, a business, a hometown can be successful. I'm a sixth-generation farm kid, but when I look at what is great about America, we need to look no further than what we grow right here, whether that's in the field, whether that's in the factory, whether that's in our schools. And Iowa started to set a real gold standard for the country. I'm not just talking about the corn that we grow here. I'm talking about this is something that now the rest of the country wants to start replicating what we're doing in places like Iowa. So let me be real specific quickly, because I think Build Back Better starts in hometowns like we've seen across the 3rd District, my district here in Iowa. We were just at a factory which was on the verge of being shut down because China had stole their idea, replicated it back in Beijing, and then started dumping it with Chinese-made steel right here in the United States. Look, but for our president to stand up and say, we're going to hold China accountable, intellectual property theft, dumping, and steel tariff manipulation, we held them to account. And I'm not proud to say now, we have XGuard, which provides not only a great service here, but is a company based in Iowa that's hiring new labor, and they're actually putting things out around the world, made in America, by Americans, for America, and for the world for that matter. When we talk about things that Iowa's been able to do, whether it's, and I like to brag on this, when I was in the state legislature, we passed real voter ID. You had to be an American citizen, and you had to show a form of ID to vote. We've had this since 2017. Washington looks at something called the Save America Act, and Democrats freak out about this. They're like, never could this be done. Well, I'll tell you right now, we've been doing it for almost a decade here, and it's pretty darn good. We know our elections count. We know our vote matters. And most importantly, we get it done on election night, not like California, where it takes weeks, and not like New Jersey, where you've got 6,600 illegals on the voter rolls, hundreds of whom who voted in the last election. So I think this is really what I love about Iowa, getting to be a voice on America's great future. And as Matt just highlighted here, we have only started the arc of the great American experiment, but it starts in hometowns like the ones we're seeing right here at home.
You bring up a good point about China. There's been obviously a big change in our position internationally. Ambassador, what have you seen the most in terms of our posture today as opposed to what it was the previous 4 years? And how are we improving?
Yeah, we obviously have been raising the alarm in both the Trump administrations on the challenges that China presents, not just for the next year or the next decade, but really for the next century. And I see it very clearly, from my seat in Brussels at NATO, and that is Europe has opened up their markets to cheap Chinese imports, especially in, for example, electric vehicles. And what they've seen is a complete collapse of their car manufacturing domestically, and that those jobs aren't coming back because they've just allowed these cheaper made Chinese EVs to flood the market. And I think they, and at every turn they have found themselves on the wrong side of the China trade, and we've taken a different tack towards that. We have not only with what the president has been able to put in place to make sure that steel, for example, isn't dumped in the United States of America, but in so many other precise ways to make sure that our manufacturing base that is coming back and really, I think, doing some fantastic things. And I've seen that, obviously with a focus on the defense industry and getting that going as fast as possible because there's just a lot of demand. And what I've seen is, we need to make sure that our defense industrial base is one of the strengths of the United States of America, and that we don't offshore all that manufacturing, hoping that we can sort of save 10 cents, but have ourselves be just strategically vulnerable to China or to any other kind of competitors across the globe.
Which we saw during COVID, right?
Correct, yeah.
With our manufacturing and ability to get supplies here in the United States. And a little bit further, some work that you have done specifically, as well as protecting American ag land from our adversaries like China. I think Secretary of War in the beginning of last year had also laid out that China was one of our greatest threats. And can you talk a little bit about how we protect American ag land specifically from China as well?
Well, Ashley, I think you hit on a really good point here. Look, I serve on 3 committees of jurisdiction. First is financial services. In Iowa, a great home to a lot of good small-town banks to big-time investors. The reality here is when you hold China accountable for intellectual property theft, when you hold their ghost fleet of illicit shipping containers that ship illegal oil straight out of Iran and fund our adversaries, when you hold China accountable for the kinds of things that they have come to the United States to pilfer from us, it starts with a strong administration. Republicans and Democrats in the past have always talked a big game about China. Very few have had the wherewithal to actually hold China accountable. The second committee is the Ag Committee. And look, this is real. In my district, when I first started in the State House, Chinese agents showed up in Iowa and literally pulled test corn out of a field. They put it in their pocket, and they wanted to go back to Beijing, chip it, and replicate it. But for the FBI and good work here in Iowa, we caught them literally on the tarmac in Des Moines and prevented it from happening. Flash forward 10 years. You don't have to be in Iowa to steal this. You can be online. You can buy an entire farm field by a Chinese shell company and operate in plain sight. We in Congress have worked hard to crack down on this, not only to stop the purchase of U.S. farmland by Chinese shell companies, but also to call out their so-called researchers who come here with known pathogens. I was the lead of the PLAN Act, which is actually what we call agroterrorism. It is an effort by China to send researchers here to the United States, places like Michigan, places across the country, including California, where they are weaponizing our own pathogens against us and bring it over in the shoes of their souls and in backpacks and think they're not going to be caught by this. And 3, I serve on the China Select Committee. And this is our best pathway to build a strategic response to China's death by 1,000 cuts. Look, the reality here is right now we are in a strategic competition. And I love that, we just sat down with the Treasury Secretary and the former U.S. Ambassador, Governor Branstad. There was a pathway before with the CCP to say, we're not going to agree on everything, but let's at least have some standards. Tragically, those days fell apart under the Biden administration. And as a result, we have a China that's more unhinged, more dangerous, and more directed in a strategic competition that they intend to win against the United States than ever before. And so what our committee, what this president has done, is to say we've got to lay out some strategic goals here. I'm so grateful for the alliances that we have, but the United States has got to be able to lead this pathway on this, right? It means making sure that China doesn't beat us in the race for artificial intelligence, that China doesn't eat up our allies. Where in Brazil right now, it's cheaper for Brazil to sell corn to Georgia in a biorefiner than it is for the state of Georgia to buy Iowa corn. That makes no sense, but it's being subsidized by the Chinese government. And it means calling out the 40,000 shell companies that operate here in the United States, including secret police stations on U.S. soil that are intimidating, recruiting, and threatening U.S. nationals who have a tie to China. These are all things we can get after, but it starts by being transparent and calling them out and holding them accountable.
Excellent. And I want to just do a follow-up really quickly because there are other pieces of legislation you've worked on recently. We talked about the American Dream. For example, you secured 21 Iowa priorities in the Farm Bill. We're getting ready to have another discussion about that when Congress comes back. Can you highlight maybe some of the things you're able to accomplish, and then what can we hopefully anticipate in the near future?
Well, look, I'm really privileged that because of folks in this room, we've done over 500 listening sessions and direct engagements. As a result, we've been able to get 95 bills out of the House of Representatives. We've been able to get 27 of those passed into law. That means through the House, through the Senate, and signed by the President of the United States. And just to put that into perspective, the person who had the seat before, when it was a blue seat, passed 3 bills. So not only are we outkicking our coverage, we're taking Iowa's best ideas to Washington. In the Farm Bill alone, we've got a young beginning farmer's tax credit so that next generation of kid can get into actual farming, because buying $1 million combine is not something money people have in their back pocket. Being able to make an investment in rural broadband, that only improves our education system, our telehealth community, our precision ag. It means that all of us get to watch the last season of Landman without it buffering, and that's good for America. We also have real efforts here that we're trying to lead to make sure that, things that are important to Iowans, water quality initiatives. We've now got water monitoring in all 21 counties in my district because of an effort that we led with appropriations to address drought, to address flooding, which just happened here to a cost of $6 million, but also to talk about things like nitrates and why Iowa has such a high cancer rate. This is a prevention side that we're doing that we've been able to get into legislation. We've already been able to pass the water monitoring, but then also make an investment in our health care. I was just at Wayne County Regional Hospital, a little tiny county right on the border with Missouri. And we're going to make a radiological cancer test screening and treatment facility. And it's going to serve all the counties around it. So when somebody like my mother's thyroid cancer isn't driving an hour just to go to Iowa City to get the treatment she needs, she can get her consultation via telehealth medicine in rural Iowa, get her treatment with a nurse who's there in Wayne County. But most importantly, we keep communities together when we make an investment in everything from rural housing, which we also just passed, to what we're doing for that next generation of young American to be able to set up shop in their hometown.
It's interesting because 92% of the media is negative against the president. They do not share the positive accomplishments of the administration, the cabinet, of Congress, even the conservative Congress, because they don't want people to know. They want everyone to feel like they're alone in supporting this president or this Congress or administration. There's a lot of ways government can actually also get in the way, right, Ambassador? And things that could probably we could use less government intervention on. And so, what could be changed? What changes have been made to make it easier to farm, to build, to grow, to have the business you talked about in America?
Yeah, I think we still have a permitting system that's just too complicated, and we need to really streamline permitting across the country, both locally and then federally. I think we could do a lot more in nuclear energy, and that to me, electricity. You mentioned AI and winning the AI race. That's very important. But some of that's going to be with winning the electricity production game as well, because AI and a lot of technologies are very energy dominant, and it's really something that I think we could work harder on. And those two things obviously are related. I think we also need to make sure that government gets out of the way in so many areas of what we're trying to accomplish. I think about my slice of the current administration's portfolio is the security, and defense area, with NATO being a political and military alliance. And what I see is that there are a lot of people with good ideas, but because a lot of the new technologies use spectrum, you can't test this stuff on a lot of the ranges that are available nationally. And so, finding ways to allow full spectrum testing of electronic warfare and drones and counter drone systems and missiles, I think is going to be a key area that we keep seeing local restrictions and state restrictions that don't allow us to do some of the proper and necessary testing on these cutting-edge technologies. I mean, obviously, many of you know that I've been to Ukraine several times, and what I've seen there is the battle lab of the future. And whether it's electronic warfare that I just mentioned, or so many other modes, it is so important that the United States maintains our technological edge. But also, one of the things that I keep explaining to our friends in the military is it can't just be a dependence on exquisite items that are super expensive and they take forever to build. We have to get to a layer of good enough munitions that can do 80% of what we need. Because again, I want peace. I don't want war. But whether you go back to Roman times or more recently to George Washington, who have that said that General Washington said the most effective way of ensuring peace is to be prepared for war. And I think that's why you're seeing the $1.5 trillion budget request from this administration for next year. And it's why you see people like me out pushing the military and pushing our defense industry to do as much as possible, as fast as possible, because we have to be able to be strong to project power globally. And that's aircraft carriers, and that's frigates, and that's missiles, and all of the items that require to be strong. You don't want to use them, but the only thing that, quite frankly, our adversaries understand is a strong America, strong economically, strong militarily, and quite frankly, strong socially, where we all are good neighbors and get along with each other. And that's one of the things that I'm really pushing, not only the United States, but then I'm also pushing our allies to keep up and to continue to join alongside us, because we also are stronger together with our allies.
And can you actually talk a little bit more about that too? Because that has changed dramatically. The president said, people need to pay their fair share, for example. How is that being received? And how is that making your work harder, easier? What is this
No,
about?
I mean,
it's an inside scoop.
A little bit of a history lesson. So in 2014, Russia annexed Crimea. And NATO's response was to agree to 2% of GDP being spent on defense, that only about 1/3 of those countries ever met until President Trump was elected. Then all of a sudden you saw everybody not only hit the 2%, but last year in The Hague, we agreed to 5% of GDP on defense spending. The United States is already there and is going to be beyond that, but we still have some of our allies that aren't doing it. The good news for Europe is one country, the biggest economy, is actually doing it, and that's Germany. They'll hit that number in about 3.5 years, which will be good for Europe. It'll actually be good for Iowans, because it will take finally the burden of securing and defending Europe off of the American taxpayer, off of Iowans, whether it's the Iowa plumber or the Iowa National Guardsman or the Iowa farmer. Those folks don't have to pay for ultimately a transfer payment to European social safety net, the most generous social programs in the world. And so, that's sheerly through President Trump and myself and a few others really pushing on this. And the good news is it's one thing to get a commitment politically. Everybody feels good about it. You issue a statement, yay. But now we are actually seeing, last year, $139 billion more spent by our European allies in Canada to make themselves stronger. And we're going to keep seeing more and more spent. So it's going to be hundreds of billions of dollars. They'll eventually equalize with the United States. So they'll be in the trillions collectively on their defense. And again, that's what's going to deter our adversaries from trying to ever take a chance in challenging the United States and the NATO alliance.
And I guess from a congressional perspective, how do we make sure that some of those technologies are developed here and maybe even in Iowa, right? And we also see how some of the drones, some of this technology, yes, it's used for strong defense, but it's also been used more in farming as well. So what do we need to do to secure manufacturing production here, and how do we make sure that it benefits the people of Iowa, the American people first?
Ashley, I think you nailed it on the head. Look, these are not only dual-use technologies, these are technologies that Americans get to build. We were just with Secretary of War Hegseth, and we highlighted the fact, if you're going to ask the American people to invest $1.5 trillion in our national defense, it can't be so that everybody else gets to coast along on this. Not only now are we seeing Germany make a major investment, they're making investment in things that are made right here in the United States. I was in Centerville just yesterday. It is the only place in America that makes female modified body armor so that our soldiers in the field have body armor that will actually protect them. The challenge was the old Department of Defense under Biden took years of requiring them to meet a standard that had already been met. It searched for other vendors, and once they actually did qualify, they still said, well, we can't make a procurement for maybe 10 years down the road. This little business, had they done this on their own, would have been out of luck and out of business. The reality is, right now, we are able to do things much faster when we work with our private partners on this. I was stationed both in Germany and flew with the German Air Force. These guys on the ground, they want to be able to make this investment. They want to make the purchase, but they're not looking to buy German-made aircraft. They're looking to buy American-made aircraft. When I was at the Defense Innovation Unit, which is a innovation cell out of Silicon Valley, it's military guys who go out there and say, hey, as opposed to us trying to go through the big defense industrial base, let's just find some great innovators in this space who can actually lead on this. I know you're seeing it all the time, Ambassador. Here's a huge opportunity for us to make this investment so that when we ask taxpayers for dollars for national security, we're actually building our own industrial base at the same time. And you want to talk about a permitting challenge. Right now, in places like California, it's not even just at the federal level, we don't have a single ship manufacturer that can put a ship to sea. One shipbuilding facility in China right now has produced more surface ships than the United States has since World War II. This should be a national security concern for us. If you want to build a ship in America today, you're either building it on the East Coast or Louisiana and sailing it all the way around to the largest naval threat in the world, which sits right off the coast of China because it's Chinese. Look, here's a great opportunity for us to reinvest again in welders, in electricians, in carpenters, in shipbuilders. This builds not only an industrial base, we build that next generation of workforce. It's one of the reasons we here in Iowa have made a huge investment in our community colleges and getting skilled trades back into the high school classroom, because not everybody needs to go on and do a 4-year degree, or God bless, become an attorney, with great respect to the attorneys in the room, because we need them.
That's a cheap shot.
But we also need the opportunity for somebody to say, hey, I have a skill set that AI can't replace, and I'm going to build it right here in the United States. This is an investment that we get to build both for national security, but dual use, because a lot of it, the same drone that right now could intercept and protect our guardsmen serving in the Middle East is also a drone that could be used for precision agriculture so we can grow the best crop in the world right here in Iowa.
Yeah, can I add a couple thoughts now? Because I think it's, I mentioned the $139 billion that was spent last year in additional money by Europe and Canada to defend and deter, but $60 billion of that was spent in the United States. So almost half of that money was spent with U.S. companies buying U.S. equipment like F-35s, which we're going to have our allies are going to have 600 F-35s at the end of this decade, and it's really a huge success story. There's nothing compares to the F-35 except maybe the F-22, which we won't sell anybody. And then, I had a chance to go down to Austin, Texas, and see Saronic, which makes the autonomous ocean-going vessels, and it's the one that just saved the 2 helicopter pilots in the Gulf. And that's a company that was started by a former Navy SEAL that just had a good idea and really moved out quickly. And the magic is not necessarily a fishing boat hull or any of the electronics in it, cameras and GPS. The magic is they're training it to sail itself, and so every day their boats are out learning how to sail in harbors and autonomously maneuver on the ocean. It's a fascinating success story, And I can point to probably many dozens of companies like that really need to be fostered, encouraged, and accelerated, that are going to meet these demands of the future. And then the dual use technology opportunities are also enormous, because those ships not only can be used to deliver munitions or to pick up pilots out of the water, they can also be used to just ship cargo across the ocean. And it's really, the opportunities are almost limitless for some of these really key American-made technologies that I'm seeing.
I thought when you were bringing up the previous administration couldn't procure for the women's part, I thought it was because they didn't know what a woman was and they couldn't figure it out. But okay.
Biological female body armor is different than biological male body armor.
Them.
That's right.
So maybe that was part of it. I want to talk about an issue that I think a lot of people is in the back of their minds, or maybe top of mind, is the issue of affordability. And it's something, it's been really interesting. I mentioned that stat, about 92% of the media is negative. If you go back and you look at costs in 2022, after the first year of the previous administration versus today, inflation, we're actually in a better position in a lot of ways, but it's not a credit that the president will get. I think people understand what he was handed when he entered this administration. But you've done a lot of work too, specifically the Rural Housing Service Reform Act became a big part of the major housing package. Housing, talk about the future, the American dream, being able to buy a house and the next generation. I think the average age of homeownership is now in the 40s, which is really unfortunate. So can you talk a little bit more about the housing package that you worked on and what that looks like in the future?
Actually, this came directly from Iowans here. You're absolutely right. Not only is the average age 40, we're 5 million homes short, and we cannot build that many homes that quickly. So we've got to get really smart about this. The last administration poured cold water on any attempts to do any type of housing reform, whether it was permitting, whether it was getting capital out into the market. In fact, in a lot of ways, they made it impossible for a number of our small businesses here with this Corporate Transparency Act that put a $500 fine for any small business that failed to report to the Biden administration, and they doubled that every single day. Talk about something that not only is a permitting nightmare, that is a economic devastation if you're a hometown lender, if you're a builder, if you're any small business. We're talking about 32 million small businesses targeted by this. First thing we did when we got in there is we stripped back that legislation. We worked with the Treasury Secretary, and they said, no more, never again. That's a great win. But then we had to move forward. Once-in-a-generation housing reform couldn't be just about big cities like Chicago or New York getting a lot more money. It had to be targeted to be able to help folks in places like Clarinda or Newton also have an opportunity to be successful. So we included in the 21st Century Road to Housing an input. I'm glad that I say I worked on this with a Democrat, and actually it's very rare, but Emmanuel Cleaver became a very good friend of mine. And when we passed the bill, he came all the way up from Kansas City, and this is an older gentleman, drove up. It's probably his last term in Congress, but he said, it is so important for me to see generational housing reform, because he grew up effectively in a tin shack in rural Missouri. And he came to Iowa at the state fair, and we worked with Habitat for Humanity as one of the entities who can build for this. We saw the price of housing for rural Iowans go down by 30% because of this legislation. It's eliminating the costs, it's eliminating the permitting, and it's eliminating the red tape. The other aspect of this, where we just need to get smarter. Look, we don't need to build everybody a $500,000 first-time house, but we do need to afford the opportunity for every American to be able to get into the American dream. And that means we need to get creative on how we do it. First and foremost, it meant we should move towards things like modular housing. Removing a requirement that you still had a steel chassis on a modular house. I don't know if you've seen some of these houses. They're beautiful, but nobody's hooking them to the back of an F-150 and driving them to the lake for the weekend. Why in the world do we still have to have a steel chassis on that? Removing that alone took almost 40% off the cost of it. Being able to do things like prefab housing, and we have one here, talk about Newton, a facility where we're training a new skill set. We can pre-build the house, and rural Iowa has access to this. Because as much as it's easy to build a cul-de-sac in Waukee or in Washington, D.C., it's a different story in rural Iowa to get one house. And I'm not talking a top-of-the-line farmhouse. I'm saying a place where a teacher could come and she could buy an actual home. Or a county deputy would have the ability to say, this is where I'm setting up my family shop. And the other aspect that I think was really important for this rural housing is we took it out of Washington, D.C. It can't be bottled up at Housing and Urban Development. Let's get it out. We moved it over to USDA, and here's why. In Iowa, as is much of the heartland of America, we have an ag extension office in every single county. Now, I don't know how many people are driving to Chicago to check on their housing loan, but if you can walk into your ag office and say, I'd like to repair the roof on my Victorian house on Main Street, or better yet, I've got a starter house that needs a new septic tank, I can get that done. We doubled the repair costs because it's not just about building new or building modern. It's about keeping the stock that we have. That's what keeps a rural community alive as much as Main Street and a new cul-de-sac. This in tandem is going to be able to put millions of Americans into the first-time house they've ever had. And I was thrilled to have both of our secretaries from Ag and HUD come see it here in Iowa. And we saw families who were paying a third of the cost for their first mortgage than they were for their rent just a week before. And that's a real success story for money and long-term investment for their families to get set up for success.
And by the way, both those cabinet secretaries, Brooke Rollins and Scott Turner, AFPI alum.
And Matt
along with
Whitaker.
myself, that's right.
That's right. That was a very proud moment for AFPI. We have 7 cabinet secretaries and over 100 folks that have gone into the administration. So our policy ideas, to see them come alive is really incredible. You mentioned this being bipartisan effort and working with the Democrat, and I think, just speaking from a policy perspective, it's changed so much, the definition of what even a Democrat is. And
we saw it in the elections last night.
We saw it in the elections last night. We saw it last week. And one of the things that is concerning, I'm sure you can speak to this too, is seeing the influence of socialism and communism going across Europe and the impact that it's having. And we talk about the American dream and the future of the American dream, and we see the policies of this far left radical movement starting to try to infiltrate. The Democrat Socialists of America have over 120,000 dues-paying members. They have over 250 elected officials so far. This is a very radical socialist, communist mentality. Are you seeing the impact of that, like in your position working with these countries? And what is the threat to our country today?
Yeah, it's actually swinging the other way right now in Europe, and there's some elections coming up in France and Germany and elsewhere that I think are going to really kind of show that a lot of Europeans are rejecting that. But it's no secret. I mean, Europeans, by and large, would prefer to live the good life. They're not grinders like the United States of America, where sort of we want to work, we want to put our shoulder to the wheel and really make progress. And so you see a lot of folks that are happy working a 36-hour a week job and not thinking about it or checking their phones until they get back to work on Monday. And it really, I think it suppresses growth in Europe and across those countries. And it also, I think it takes a lot of folks. There's some just crazy statistics in some of these countries where just to get an employee, to hire somebody, is almost impossible because nobody really wants to work. At least from my perspective, and watching it as a true outsider, kind of in a strange land, it's interesting culturally. But anywhere that socialism or communism has been tried, it has failed. Ronald Reagan famously said, the problem is you eventually run out of other people's money, and I think that's got to always be remembered. I mean, we are. And this is, again, I talked about American exceptionalism and the American dream, and it's part and parcel because there's, we all know that there's no such thing as a free lunch. That sort of if you're giving it to somebody, you're taking it from somebody else, and ultimately you might be even taking it from future generations, and that is can't continue, and it leads down a path of that's unsustainable, and we also know that we have to live within our means, and it is so important. Really, that's the lessons you learn in Iowa as an Iowan are just they're just universal. And if you could teach, have everybody be an Iowan, and then go out in the world, the world would be an extraordinary place. Be a lot more corn dogs. Be a lot more
Casey's taco pizza.
Yeah, breakfast pizza and taco pizza. There's a lot of But I got criticized recently for talking about food too much, so I can't. But you don't get to be my size without eating a lot. Let's just say that. But I think you're right. I think that is the constant challenge, because what socialists and what communists run on is the same thing that Mandami, did in the policies are to give things away, to have free groceries or free housing. I mean, and you just ultimately run out of other people's money, and it's not a sustainable system. And we need to always guard against that. I think President Trump has been very adamant about we will never be a socialist country. We will never be a communist country. The United States is too unique to let that happen. But you're seeing it obviously playing out in real time, and that tension is for sure real.
Actually, I'd just double down on this. Look, I think we all should recognize democracy is great, capitalism is great, and American exceptionalism is great. And we have a real opportunity here, but we have seen laid bare in the last weeks alone a seismic difference in what I would call the old school Democrat, the Kennedy-level Democrat who wants to do great for their nation. Now it is a progressive, far left, dare say, socialist agenda that is more like, hey, what am I owed by everybody else? And you see this right now not only in Mondami in New York, but in Al Sayed in Michigan, in the number of individuals who are elected in their congressional primaries. Make no doubt about it, there's going to be a cabal of socialist Democrats who are in Congress the next session. And God forbid Hakeem Jeffries or Nancy Pelosi or whoever the Democratic minority leader, emphasis on minority leader, is, they will be held hostage by a small group of Democratic socialists who have been very clear, including, I represent Des Moines, Iowa. I'm privileged to get to represent one of the most competitive districts in America right now. But on this ballot, it is a contrast vote between what we have delivered under President Trump in his first 18 months alone versus what they want to do to seismically change the United States. Get rid of the U.S. Supreme Court. Have the president be elected by the House of Representatives. Abandon the Senate. I'm not going to lie, on some days I could maybe get down with that. But equally, the things that are really tragic, not support our law enforcement. Get rid of borders, government-run grocery stores. And for a state that helps both feed and fuel the world, could you imagine a worse scenario, and we've all been on military bases, than a commissariat that is on every corner telling people what they can buy, what they can't buy, empty shelves, and effectively anybody running in and taking it and saying, well, that's somebody else's taxpayer dollars feeding that shelf. The market economy crashes for ag, but worst of all, it's just bad for the country when we depend on government to be the source of all of our answers.
I just want to follow up on that really quick, and then we'll end on a positive note, I promise. Yeah. But you served in the last couple of years of the previous Trump administration, and you saw firsthand what happens when there's a party that's constantly, or a side that's constantly trying to undermine the president. And should we not have an America First Congress after this year? What does the next 2 years look like? What gets done if we lose the House?
Well, the work on behalf of the American people and Iowans would stop, because you would, immediately, I would predict, go into an impeachment, or a series of impeachments. I mean, I think there will be nothing productive coming out of the House if it changes, and also I think there will be a lot of subpoenas, a lot of investigations. I mean, it's just, you can imagine, because we saw it, the last time. That was when I famously testified in the House Judiciary Committee and told the chairman that his 5 minutes were up. That was, I don't know if that. I don't know if that, I'd do that again. Maybe, It was Jerry Nadler, so I probably would. But ultimately, I think, so much. We all want a federal government that works, that serves what we want it to do, not the interests of the lobbyists or the DC insiders, that kind of stays out of our way, doesn't get involved, in our lives, and ultimately allows us to become the best possible version of ourselves, the best possible version of our communities, and ultimately, propel the United States of America to its, glorious future. And that's, for me, where I'm sure that the congressman feels the same way and does this every day. He's working on behalf of the people. And I just don't think that if we see a change in the House or the Senate, that ultimately that will work on behalf of the American people. It will be settling scores, trying to make people look bad, try to create photo opportunities or fake news stories. And I think the progress we have made so far, that we still need to make more progress, I think would probably end at that point in time.
Closing thoughts.
Well, look, I want to be an eternal optimist. I know we all are, because we're great Iowans and we're great Americans. Look, I think that there's an opportunity here for us to have a contrast in this. I noted the fact we worked with folks across the aisle, but more importantly, we worked for Iowans on real solutions, and we deliver those time and again. This Congress in the last 18 months has done historic work, the largest tax cuts in American history, the most secure border we've ever had, a real investment in ag, $50 billion, $66 billion put towards health care, particularly here in Iowa, $209 million going to rural health care. We've been able to do once in a generation housing. We've been able to move forward not only a farm bill that's been stuck forever in the old administration, where we went from $50 billion in farm deficit to now being able to actually move ahead to what could happen. And I think you're absolutely right, Ashley. We need to be realistic about this. I highlighted my predecessor passed 3 bills in her time in Congress. The person who's running against me has been in the Senate 3 election cycles, passed 0 bills. Their goal here is not to pass legislation to work for Iowans, to hold people accountable. It's to say, we oppose President Trump. That is the only thing that they are running on. If you want to hear that for the next 2 years, I don't care who you are, Democrat, Independent, or Republican, you should say that is bad for our country. We've got a real opportunity to not only move things forward, but to continue to build on what this first 18 months looks like. Because from anyone's perspective, we're not under the worst of the Biden administration, where gas was $5 a gallon. We're not under the worst of the Biden administration, where there was candidly nobody at the helm, not only in the White House, but where we abdicated our responsibilities in Congress and allowed departments and agencies to become rulemaking authorities that fine, feed, and punished Americans. We're no longer under an administration, as we saw the last time, that puts Washington ahead of hometowns. And I'm so thrilled that we've been able to work with leaders in the administration, leaders right here in Iowa, and most importantly, our congressional and Senate candidates who are driving real solutions based out of heartland ideas that now become heroic achievements in Washington. Let's keep this up. And this is what I'm going to say not only to our viewers here, but the reality is we each have a responsibility in this. We can't just be looking at Matt to say, hey, help us defend NATO, do it alone. We can't be looking at our members of Congress and saying, like, we need you to hold crazy ideas accountable. We've got to go out and win elections so that we can continue to deliver on real policy solutions that things like AFPI have led on, that the administration have led on, and the success we've had for the last 18 months. Let's make this another 24 months of real American exceptionalism being driven by our team.
Awesome. Well, thank you both so much for joining us. You all have a lot of places you can be, and you chose to be here. So thank you so much for joining us today, and looking forward. The countdown is on to Election Day.
80 days if you're counting.
That's right. Thanks, everyone.
Ladies and gentlemen, this concludes today's program. On behalf of our host, the America First Policy Institute, thank you for joining us. We appreciate your attendance and wish you a safe and enjoyable rest of your day.